Hello everyone, I'm very happy that we will be doing a very nice conversation with Swami Padmanabha. I'm very happy that he accepted my invitation to talk from his spiritual perspective about the psychological issues of our contemporary life. He's a Bhakti Yoga practitioner from more than 20 years and he has deep realizations and very practical knowledge. So think for sure that this interview will be of benefit to you all. So thank you, Maharaj, and very nice to have you here.
Thank you so much for the invitation. Very happy to share with you and with all of you as well.
Maybe I would like to ask you as a beginning about the psychological issues, and we see that there is kind of a pandemic of anxiety and depression. What you feel and what you think about this condition from your spiritual perspective?
Well, you mentioned the word pandemic, and of course nowadays that's somehow connected with coronavirus. And interestingly, your question didn't mention coronavirus, but you spoke about pandemics of anxiety and depression. But somehow or other, one pandemics it's not leading necessarily to the other, but mostly it's highlighting that other pandemic was already there, but somehow became triggered by the specific dynamics and circumstances of, in this case, what the virus implied, like quarantine and really being forced, if you will, to remain in isolation or trying to be more time with yourself and with others. And I think all the things, of course, are already there, that those are part of our daily life, but put us in a very direct way with many fears and many non-resolved issues in our psychology on a daily life that sometimes we may prefer not to pay attention to. As I sometimes say, we throw them to the shed of our subconscious and conscious instead of facing them and trying to accept that there's something that needs to be integrated. Sometimes I refer to the integration of complexity that sometimes gets in the way of our real progress. So a pandemic, for example, like the one we're going through the last years, I think in one sense we may say that's a curse, something that shouldn't be happening, and so many negative connotations are there. But in another sense, it has brought a lot of light, in the sense of maybe shedding light on our shadow, if you will, not trying to show us those unresolved issues that we need to solve sooner or later. So, for example, I know that nowadays the number of people, committing suicide or killing others and domestic violence, all this increases exponentially, in part because we were forced by circumstance to be together at home more time than usual, being with others closely more time than usual, being with ourselves more time than usual, and maybe we realized we didn't know too much what to do with that. We realized we were not ready for such a situation, and the result of that was whatever the form it may take: depression, anxiety, violence. With all of them are, according to the view of yoga and Vedanta, not so much the problem in itself, but the different symptoms of the real and only problem that we may conceive, which is lack of, if you will, lack of education. We call that in Sanskrit terms avidya, which means vidya means education or knowledge, and avidya means lack of education about who we are and therefore who others are as well, what everything is. So that lack of education may take us to misidentify with who we are, and of course when you try to relate with something from the wrong perspective, if I take you as something that you are not, and I insist in that wrong perspective, and I conceive myself in a wrong way, you can just imagine the result of that equation or combination. So the pandemic has really, in one sense, has been a blessing, in the sense of it's showing us, for example, how much we may be still fearful of death, because it's something that appears so close to us. Okay, I may be the next one, and maybe without pandemic I may be the next one as well, but certain dynamics in life make us like become especially aware of something that it was already there, but we were not too aware of. And especially I will also consider that the pandemic like nowadays is very powerful, it's bringing us a very powerful message of how things are out of our control, how many of the things that we would like to be in a certain way are not to be so, are not destined to be in that particular way, and how when something gets out of our control we start to get deep anxiety, deep fear, because out of our control implies there's no control or there's some other control, but it's not mine, and I have maybe not learned to trust that other control. Because actually, as I always say, one nice Buddhist quote once I read, there was a person meditating very peacefully in one lake, in one picture, and the quote say, "Relax, everything is out of control." No, because generally we think relax, I will relax when everything is under control. But the quote says everything's out of control. Not out of control in every sense, but out of your control. Which doesn't mean we should be lazy and not do our part, but we should understand in the bigger scheme of things, in the bigger picture, we are not to control everything that is happening. And when something is throwing us out of our comfort zone, sometimes that becomes too uncomfortable, and we get too nervous or too violent, too bewildered, and we may act in ways that we ourselves may be surprised. Why did I do that? Why did I do this? And so on. So some ideas, and of course one more thing that comes to my mind in connection to a pandemic like this one, it's also showing about how much, again, everything is not in our full control, but at the same time we have free will, and there is some place for controlling what we choose in our life. So when we do not choose in the proper direction, for example, when we choose to damage the environment and the planet and nature, there is a point, if you multiply that for millions and millions of people doing that at the same moment, there is a moment that planet Earth will say, enough. No? So there will be some kicking, like saying, give me a break. No? So this type for me of pandemics also has a lot to do with that, with trying to realize, okay, we were not behaving that properly as a species, as a human race. We were not that human, actually. So all this that seems so unbecoming maybe is coming to us to teach us a deep lesson. Sometimes the deeper lessons are the harder ones or the more painful ones, but as we always know, pain does not necessarily mean that the situation is painful in itself, but I am perceiving it as painful, because for other person the same situation may not be painful. So the question is actually why this is painful for me, and of course that judgment comes in our own minds, in our own hearts. No? So some ideas that I think could help us to realize what's the background, the underlying invisible background to all these statistics and numbers, the increasing of violence and anxiety and depression, how we should turn more inwards and not be afraid of that, of course, trying to get proper advice, proper guidance, and gradually entering more in touch with our deepest sides. The more we do that, the more we will be able to deal with any situation that will come in our lives, that may come at any moment without our having planned that things. No?
Yeah, very important points you mentioned. One thing about the integration of complexity and the losing and the sense of control, or appreciating that we don't have control, many of the psychological issues come from that root. I feel that I don't have control, and this makes me feel unsafe, that I'm in danger. And from these opposites, in one way I fear that I'm not in control, in the other opposite I try to gain control, and we start to gain control to intrusive thoughts, compulsive behaviors, and all these are like coping mechanisms. So how can we integrate that complexity?
Yeah, as with many other things you mentioned, these two extremes, not this black and white tendency that we jump from one extreme of the pendulum to the other, but generally, of course, all sages from all traditions actually have recommended what we may call the middle path, no? Trying not to go to the extreme of I want everything to be under my control. It's not possible. You can try as much as you like, it won't work. But not to the other extreme of nothing is in my control, everything is chaotic, there is no ultimate sense of meaning or order or purpose in the cosmos. Some people get to those conclusions. They basically conclude there is no ultimate meaning, purpose, order, everything is chaos. So that's a dangerous stance to take also, because not only you may get discouraged or depressed, but you may get just like no sense of morality whatsoever, because if there's no purpose, I can do whatever I like and it's the same. So that can take to so many dangerous situations. So I would say that trying to find a middle point in everything is the healthy and the situation and the healthy stance to take. For example, when I say everything is out of control, actually I do not mean again everything. There is something that I can control. There are some choices I can make now, today, and it's my responsibility to do so. But the problem is that some people get discouraged when they feel there's no control from my side, but some other people may get afraid when I tell them you have to decide something in your life, you have to take responsibility, be committed, and it's like I will prefer that someone else is controlling everything. So different cases will be afraid of the other side of the coin, if you will. But the healthy idea will be, again, that most of the things are out of my control. Doesn't mean that everything is out of control absolutely, because that will imply if it's not under my control, it's out of control. It doesn't work like that. I mean, we are not the ultimate center of reality. No? So in the yogic perspective, there is a higher ultimate consciousness. Different names are ascribed to it in different traditions, but there is a higher agency, if you will, of control, of harmony, of ascribing the result of our actions, which is a very important point in the Indian outlook, karma, which means whatever you do, it's carrying some implication, some reaction. So it's not a chastisement law, but it's an educational law that you learn through making mistakes sometimes. But the spirit of the law is trying to uplift you, to upgrade you. So I will say it's healthy to understand actually the fact that some things are not in my control. Most of them doesn't mean that A, everything is out of control, no, and B, I have nothing to do, no, I have something to do. So there's one part of each one of us as beings, we call it free will, however you may like to put it, and there's responsibility. And again, we may be afraid of responsibility, but in responsibility is growth, is progress. So no matter how small may be the choice that I can make today, I mean, if I do it properly, that will give me in tomorrow or later today a bigger chance of making better choices and deeper choices and broader choices. In the beginning, if we do not exercise our will in the best possible way, we may feel contracted, but the more our choices are better informed, the more our will be free will. Now, free will doesn't mean I can do whatever I like. It doesn't work like that. But the yogic tradition will recommend try to contact reality in such a way that you realize that there is some underlying control. And the control is not a bad word also, because sometimes with control we may connect with dictatorship or authoritarian regimes. But you can also control someone by love, by affection. The great example is the mother and the child on her lap. The two of them are controlled by each other, by the force of love. And the two of them are okay. It's not that I don't want this control anymore. The two of them are charmed with each other. So there is a possibility of control through love. And for us, that's the ultimate control in life. How everything is under control in life is through love. And until and unless we learn to love ourselves, we won't be able to fully grasp and understand how everything is controlled by love. How love is the ultimate force in the universe, basically.
Oh, very nice. In this context, many times in the psychological issues presents one problem. We go to one of these opposites: self-sacrifice or self-worth or self-sufficiency. Many of the people I meet on everyday basis, they have this tendency to over self-sacrifice, like neglecting needs, suppressing some desires, feelings, and do everything for the others, everything for the work, and go to that extreme. And when they reach some burnout, they go to the other, only self-sufficiency, ultra independence, no mutual self-worth, like putting some barriers and like this. And this is also like maybe one thing to integrate, but what are your thoughts about that?
Yeah, again, we are speaking in the same, we are on the same page, speaking about integration of complexity and these unresolved extremes that actually are two faces of the same coin. So one side extreme of self-sacrifice, which maybe closely tied with codependence, where I really give myself in a toxic way, unhealthy way for others, but also it's not ultimately for the pleasure of others or in the service of others. I actually take that stance because I want to obtain from them a certain reaction that will serve my purpose of my existential void, if you will, that I need to fulfill through them. Actually, I will slave myself to them, so they slave themselves to me. They become my, and react as I will need. So it seems like self-sacrifice is something very like honorable, but in the ultimate underlying thing is still some personal need that I need to fulfill. But I'm not doing that, of course, in a healthy way, because as you mentioned, I'm doing like denying even my own individuality, and I'm going to extremes. And the point is that I won't be able to really please other persons in a substantial way if I'm not trying to be myself the best that I can. I mean, if I'm trying to deny my own individuality, externally it may seem everything is okay, but internally I will feel something else is going on and it's not okay. So self-sacrifice in the context of, I mean, it's not bad, the word sacrifice is not a bad word. It comes to sacrificio in Latin. I speak Spanish, is quite connected. Sacro officio, which means like sacred, sacro. Officio is like work. So sacrificio, of sacrifice, means like sacred engagement. So that's the real idea of sacrifice. I know that sometimes in practice people have misunderstood the term, and now you hear the word that you may not like to hear it again, if you will. But real sacrifice means I accept to certain challenges in my life that I feel themselves as difficult, but I know they are helping me to become the best possible version of myself. It's on that sustainable level. It's not that I over endeavor to the point of burning myself totally, or to the point of self-denial of my own individuality, but as an individual I try to accept the challenge of becoming a better person every single day, and sacrifice means that, like a healthy pinching, if you will, to grow today a little bit, tomorrow a little bit, because as I always say, if we don't go for the difficult things, generally when we hear something's difficult, we tend to evade that, like to escape from that. We want the easier way, the easier path, but actually if something is easy, means there's nothing to learn from that. I already know how to do that. There's no challenge involved, and it's boring eventually. If I play guitar and I already know how to play some particular scale, and my teacher doesn't give me something more difficult, I get discouraged. I would say I will stop coming to these classes. But if he gives me something extremely difficult to the point of being impossible, I also get discouraged. So I get discouraged when something is impossible and when something is easy. So the middle point between easy and impossible is difficult. So this has to do with this idea of trying to do some sacrifice in a healthy way, embracing my individuality, because that's a big challenge also. Sometimes it's easier to just go with the current, if you will, do not think as an individual and just do copy paste of whatever everyone else is doing, saying, thinking. But there is a big price to make our individuality like blossom, but not to the other extreme of like self-sufficiency, and where I just see myself as absolutely like independent from everything and everyone, because that can take to different unhealthy stances like pride or whatever, seeing myself like separated from reality. I mean, I'm not dependent, we are dependent on so many things. In the Indian tradition, this is very nicely exhibited from the very first moment of the day, when they do, for example, in yoga, this Surya Namaskar, which is like offering some salutations to the sun in the sunrise in the morning. And this is not only some physical exercise and movement, but has to do with acknowledging, oh, without the sun, there is no light. Without the light, there is no life, basically. So our daily life depends in so many ways from the sun. So we have minimum to look at him once a day and say thank you, some gratitude, like implying I'm not independent in regard to this self-sufficiency. I can by myself. Well, if I take the light of the sun, the air you are breathing, the water you are drinking, and not only from this bigger cosmological reality, but even so many people in your life that is giving you support, affection, knowledge, nourishing. I mean, we are interdependent. We have our independency, if you will, but it's in the context of healthy dependence. There is a place for being healthy. As I gave the example of the baby and the mother, the baby is really dependent on the mother, but it's a healthy way. It's not something that the baby says, I want to be independent now, leave me alone. He's receiving affection and nourishment. So again, we should try to find the middle path. No? That is, I have my individuality, I have to take responsibility for myself, but also I'm a part of a whole. So there are so many other things that are playing their role, and I'm depending on them, so I should be humble to acknowledge that, to be grateful for all those many things I can't provide to myself independently. So I should have that type of awareness, but also at the same time, not to the other extreme of not doing anything and going for some healthy sacrifice. Now, interestingly, in the sacred texts from India, one of them called Bhagavad Puran or Srimad Bhagavatam, it is some stories describe about the beginnings of the creation, if you will, or the birth of the whole cosmic manifestation. And it is said that the very first created being, Brahma, the very first word he heard when he didn't know what to do, because it is said he was all by himself in the universe, was tapa, and these two syllables, which mean basically sacrifice, in a healthy way, sustainable. And interestingly, when he heard this word sacrifice, he started to meditate. He started to look deeper into himself. Not sacrifice doesn't necessarily mean externally, physically, like doing something extremely extreme, but just maybe looking inside. That may be a whole sacrifice for most of us who are living nowadays in a particularly distracted society and world. So, some ideas.
In this context, there is also this opposite and psychological issue, loneliness and belonging to superficial things. Like we try to belong to our work for place maybe, or nationality, sexuality, but these things kind of don't give this sense of true belonging. And on the other extreme, we're feeling isolated, lonely.
Well, again, we go back to the term of avidya, which I mentioned before regarding lack of education about our own selves. And these things happen because of that, because we don't have a clear picture of who we really are. And we are trying to find ourselves in one direction or another. We're trying to fit with certain designations or some particular sense of identity. But at the end, the point is that according to the vision of the East, and not only of the East for sure, and I'm sure according to our intuitive experience, we are permanent beings. We are eternal. We are not temporary. No, we are not here today and gone tomorrow. We are there forever. So the problem with these different types of I would try to belong in this direction, in that direction, that generally those belongings are tied to temporary situations, to temporary identities, my body, my country, my football team, my whatever, something that with time it won't be there. So there comes a fracture between who we are, who we would like to be, and who we actually are. Interestingly, instead of trying to become something, we should pay attention to who we already are. And sometimes that's the problem. We are trying to add designations and things on our sense of identity, but material possessions, money, extreme sense enjoyment, to belong to something, or make people or things to belong to us. No, this type of polarity, as we spoke the other day. Sometimes our sense of I depends on our sense of mine. No, whatever is mine, that's who I am. I was born in this country. This is my country. He is my son. I am his father. He is my brother. I am his brother. So my sense of I depends on my sense of my. But the Vedic or the Indian tradition teaches us ultimately, and this may be a little bit shocking for some, but nothing belongs to us. Actually, that should create some sense of deep relief. Because sometimes we are really trying to make everything belong to us. That's one of the directions. And in time we see that so many things are coming and going, my car, my this. But our sense, who we really are, remains there. So the problem here is when we try to belong, or try something else to belong to us that is temporary, and we are not temporary, we are permanent. So this is this clashing of realities, temporary versus eternal. We are eternal, so according to the vision, knowledge, wisdom of yoga, we are eternal, and we should try to belong to the eternal. We should try to feel this belonging, and we should try to understand that's our ultimate permanent identity. And when that is properly established and we are living our life in that way, fear basically disappears, because fear, which is, I will say, the most pervading experience in the material realm, if you will, is because of that. Fear of death mainly. Death basically means there will be an end to this at one point. Because again, we may be identified with a temporary reality, but when you go deep into certain practices and meditations and inner contemplations, you will realize beyond all these comings and goings and changes and ups and downs of the temporary realm, there is a permanent being in me. There's a permanent being. So trying to get focused in that direction, that's really really relieving, and gives lots of hope and lots of joy and natural joy. I mean, it's not about trying to be happy, and that, as one person once said, the main cause of suffering is that we are trying to be happy, instead of realizing all that is already in us. So we are like sitting on the treasure. We are looking for the treasure in every direction, but we don't realize we are sitting on top of that. So it's closer than what we think. So yeah, yoga, which includes a lot of psychology, implies try to look inside with proper guidance, because I know it may be a little bit like mysterious to go there, scary. But and that's the point we mentioned the other day. Generally we are afraid of those things we don't know. So even if we have a beautiful and bright potential waiting for us, if it's unknown to us, we may be afraid of that only just because it is unknown, not because it is bad, just because something that is unknown creates certain sense of fear. But in time it's nice that we get accustomed to deal with the unknown, because what is known, again, as I mentioned, is part of the comfort zone. It's part of something that ultimately is boring and not fully satisfying. So we need to go deep to this idea and really understand how to accommodate this sense of belonging in connection to permanent values, to our permanent being, who we are.
And this permanent being, it's kind of suffocated from this, on the one side, this urgency culture, everything should happen now, and I'm already late, and my to-do list. And also on the other extreme, you have this sense of okay, I will go with the flow, I live for the moment, and this is kind of swimming in the pool of instant gratification. And our permanent being is kind of not reached.
Yeah, totally. And of course, this is really a sign of our times, no? Like the life dynamics are getting on one side like faster and faster and faster and faster, and every time we are doing more things, and we have less and less time at the same time for really doing what we need, if you will. Working more time than before, so we say, okay, I will have more money, but then you don't have time to use that money, or by working so much you get sick and you need to invest all that money in that. So at the end of the day, you became drained and you become like exhausted, and you are just carried by the current. And I know it's not an easy thing. I'm not using the word easy in regarding to this, because we are really very much influenced by the environment, and we were maybe. So naturally, if certain current goes in one direction, it may not be that easy to go against that. But somehow some adjustment should be done, because if we feel I'm not satisfied with this, and I'm in constant anxiety. In India we have these three terms. I'm sorry if I'm mentioning too many Sanskrit words today, but some brief ones. Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas, sometimes called the gunas, or like you have the three main colors, red, yellow, and blue, which mean all the other colors. These three, if you will, levels of experience are coloring our daily life in particular way. So Sattva, Rajas, and Tamas have to do with Sattva is more like balance, equilibrium, and is connected with the present moment. Rajas is more with desire and agitation and anxiety, and is more connected with the future. And Tamas, which is considered, is defined as darkness. It has more to do with violence and nostalgia and depression and the past. No? So sometimes we try to, again, regarding these three phases of time, of course, the most recommended thing is try to be in the present, but as I will say, in a particular way, because sometimes we try to escape the present and fly into the future with this like anxiety level. I need to do this, I'm not going this, and always we are looking towards something that will never happen actually, because when you are there, you already are looking to something more in the future and to something more in the future, and you are never living in the present moment. And the present moment is the only moment, as one sage in my native country Argentina said, Facundo Cabral, he said, try to get accustomed to live in the present, because you will live there for eternity. Like implying there's no other place to be actually. So when you force yourself into the future and the past, you cannot go back into the past and make everything, change everything. But you cannot travel to the future and arrange all those things are to be worked on in the present. In the present you have the exact measure of past and future present there, because in the present you receive the result of your past actions bearing fruit in the present, and in the present, according to how you act now here, that will determine your future. So that exact measure of future and past that you need, the one that is in the present. If you want more than that, you are entering into some like evasive mechanism and so on. But of course, also inhabiting the present is just, as you mentioned, it's not just like, okay, I'll be in the present, let's go with the flow, and whatever happens, or something like this. Of course, if you are a very highly enlightened spiritual practitioner and you are really in touch with the ultimate source of everything, you may say that same thing, but from a very different perspective that someone may say that same thing from a evasive perspective, of lazy perspective, or just being carried away. Okay, I'm in the present and I just live what I want, and that may be more like a promotion of extreme selfishness only. Like, I do not care about anything except for what I want myself now. And you can ask those people how satisfied they are, and really and how deep is their daily experiences. And I'm sure by such a stance, it's not possible to, it's not sustainable to begin with, no? Because if you really are attentive to what's coming to you in the present, really attentive, is so much sacredness coming, so much revelations and insights you will receive in the present that you won't just say, oh, whatever I like, I will try to obtain that in a whimsical way, in a selfish way, but you will mostly like witnessing a revelation that is constantly coming to you in the present moment. That's what's going on actually. So, yeah, proper psychology, proper spirituality has a lot to do with trying to catch that purpose, that meaning that is coming to you at every single moment that we may be missing. So.
And how can we connect this meaning, which is coming at every time, with our permanent sense of self?
Mm-hmm. Well, to begin with, the idea of meaning is, of course, an important one, and here, with your permission, I will quote someone we both admire, who is Viktor Frankl, and his well-known logotherapy, where he basically makes this point that life is about finding meaning and purpose. It's not about being happy. He makes this like shocking statement, because for most of us it's like life is about being happy, and when I'm suffering, I have to see what I do to stop suffering. No, I want happiness, I don't want suffering. That's what life is about for most people. But maybe in that dynamics of I want happiness, I don't want suffering, we are missing the meaning and purpose of both happiness and suffering. We may just running after superficial happiness, some temporary sense of enjoyment in our senses, but no deep meaning related to that. And then some suffering may come as a result of that search of false happiness, and we may not be either very deep and introspective what this is teaching me. So Viktor Frankl say actually the meaning of life is not happiness. Of course it's not suffering also. We are not promoting masochism, but the meaning of life is purpose, is meaning. And the meaning of life is meaning, if you will, no? Is to find meaning into whatever you are going through. If you are going through a very joyful experience, which is okay, try to reach purpose in that. Do not just be distracted, or anesthesia, I'm suffering, I want to be happy. And sometimes even when we suffer too much, we will think that happiness is just stop suffering, which actually is not the same as being positively happy. But the point is, whatever the case, you may be being happy or you may be suffering, and instead of trying to escape from suffering, we should understand what this wants to teach me actually. What's the teaching there? All of our main sacred texts in India start with this type of breakthrough situations, are really with deep existential problems. The famous Bhagavad Gita is a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna. And basically Arjuna is in a situation when he has to fight in a battlefield. He's a warrior, and he on the opposite army are all his dear relatives and friends. For certain circumstances, they happen to be on the other side, and he is expected to fight. Of course, also this represents one's own attachments and fears, and Krishna, like the guru or teacher, is saying, fight, kill them. Again, we are not promoting kill your relatives, but kill those things that you are attached to in a temporary way and that are actually making you suffer. And we may be afraid of that. And another book also, like the Bhagavad Purana I quoted before, there is a famous king there that is cursed to die in 7 days. So again, all these shocking scenarios. Imagine if someone comes and say, you have 7 days to live. Which is okay, so which is my list of priorities in life, where I'm pointing to. And death, in that sense, is very, I'm sorry if I'm going sidetracking to other directions, but it's part of the reply. That death, in that sense, is very important, because death puts life in context, basically. Generally, we live as if we are not going to die. Of course, in one sense, we are not going to die. As I mentioned, we are eternal. But at the same time, it's okay if you understand you're eternal. But if you are not identified with your eternal side, we will leave this body. That's the idea. In India, they do not say die, by leaving the body, changing body. So the point is, generally we live as if that will never happen. Because in one sense we have the intuition, I'm eternal, but at the same time we may not be fully aware of that, and we live this human life without understanding it has beginning and end, and getting attached to things that at some time we have to leave and so on. So the point is that, of course, is if someone tells me you have some few hours to live, immediately I'm sure all of us, we may be having so many ideas in mind, I have to do this, I have to buy this, but if you know you have some few minutes left, the real priorities should come on the surface. And all the other things, quickly you realize, oh, this was superficial. But the point is why I'm allowing myself to be distracted with all those things on a daily basis and not retain the real priorities always. Well, maybe because I think I have so much time and I can do whatever I like, but when the moment of continuing our journey into another body comes, we may be like terrified, what to do now. So it's important that all this is connected to your question, like purpose in connection to our permanent self, our real self. From permanent self, it means we are permanent, our self is permanent, and the fulfillment of ourself, according to, specifically in this case, to my tradition called Bhakti, which has to do with, it's one of the different Vedantic traditions, old ancient philosophical schools of thought in India, a theistic one, where the emphasis is a lot on what we call Bhakti, or devotion, or love. So for us, the ultimate sense of purpose that is tied to our self as a permanent being is not only that we are eternal, which is already a lot. I mean, when you realize, have a glimpse of, I'm eternal. I remember having that experience some 20 years or more back, like one aha moment, like someone was saying in one lecture, we are eternal, and for a moment I had full experience of what does it mean to be eternal. It was such a huge relief. I mean, everything was perfectly okay. And for a moment you realize all my problems are tied to this identification with the non-eternal. But interestingly, in this tradition, it said eternality is just one aspect of who you are. So they speak about Sat, Chit, Ananda. So Sat means you are eternal. Chit means you are conscious. You are not just inert for eternity, but you have the capacity of being aware. But the point is, there's one more ingredient that we need to make the whole equation be fulfilled, which is Ananda. Ananda means love, basically. The bliss that comes from loving. So we can be eternal, but it doesn't make too much sense if we are not conscious. We can be eternal and conscious, but if that being eternal and conscious is not taking us to the ultimate experience of love, we can be eternally conscious of suffering, and that's not very nice for anyone. So it all converges into this ultimate idea of Ananda, which has to do with finding bliss. But bliss, again, not so much into like superficial, quick happiness, but into purpose. Now, when we really understand, the idea here is not so much I will create my own purpose to everything. I will make purpose to everything, but I will discover the inherent purpose that is embedded in everything. And I know we are now in postmodern times where the tendency is whatever you feel subjectively, that's reality. No? There's nothing outside, you create your own thing, so whatever is good for you, that's okay. But that's also a dangerous idea, because if for me it's good to kill other people, I mean, I'm just justifying something that is terrible. So our idea is not so much create your own purpose, but try to understand that reality in itself has a purpose, and the meaning of life is to really discover that purpose on a daily basis, more and more and more and more, and find ourselves there. And that's a whole journey. And there's of course not any magical formula that you press a button, you are there. But it has all these nuances and ups and downs that in our daily lives that we will go through, that will make actually our life worth living. Also, so.
And what could be some questions that we could ask ourselves on everyday basis to align to that search?
Well, first of all, I will say that we could ask to ourselves, one of the many questions could be, am I living my day as if it were to be the last day of my life? Not with fear, not like paranoia, but like hypothetically speaking, if this were to be the last day of my life, I'm living my day in the way I would like and in a way that I'm really able to feel balanced and satisfied and or not. Because sometimes this idea is there. We are not living our life as we are supposed to, or as we will really like to, in a healthy way, and we let ourselves be trapped by so many things. But sometimes that creates the vicious circle of shame and guilt, and I'm not doing what I'm supposed to do. I would really like to do these other things, but I'm not doing them. But maybe I'm not doing what I should do to do them also. So also that's a healthy question. Again, all this in a sustainable level, not to like torture us, but am I really doing my best to become the best possible version of myself today? Because I think we were speaking about that yesterday. Sometimes it's very easy to fall into this, what we may call victim consciousness, where we throw responsibility and blame into others, into the environment, and the enemy is outside, and I put myself as a victim, and I'm not willing to accept. I could do something in my side to upgrade myself, to maximize my situation, instead of demanding others, you should become better because you are making me suffer, you should change this because I'm not comfortable with that. And maybe the other person is doing their best to change, but that's their capacity at present. So instead of waiting for the other to become better, and only then I will be okay, that will never happen possibly. Or instead of waiting for the whole world to be in harmony, we should take again full responsibility. And as Mahatma Gandhi will say, you want to see a change in the world, change yourself. You are the change that you want to see in the world, because you are part of the world. So we could ask that also. And we could also, again, continuously, in a healthy way, try to inquire about meaning and purpose. I am really finding meaning and purpose in everything I'm doing in my life. Even as someone very admired by me, the Christian priest Thomas Merton, he will say, you try to find meaning and purpose in those things of your daily life that you consider them the most ordinary. When you may feel, oh, this is totally ordinary, I don't know, I have to go to the bathroom or whatever. Try to find some purpose there, because probably there is something extraordinary that you can extract from the so-called ordinary, and try to keep in that idea. And again, sometimes it's not enough for us ourselves to maintain that, and sometimes, and that's an important principle of universal spirituality, is try to keep the company of other like-minded people that may create a feedback, no? And an influence, a positive influence in your life, especially people who you may consider more advanced, more mature, but at the same time who are really friendly and well-wisher. So those types of friendships and companies will really affect your life, will really create a new paradigm, a shift in your list of priorities and values, and it's nice that we may remain open. That's another good question. How much I am open to change, for example, today. I'm willing to learn, because again, it's not so much about being right, it's much about being willing to learn. You may speak with someone, and generally there is a statistic done on that sometimes when two people speak, and they ask them, are you more concerned with being right or with finding the truth? And like 90% say being right. So that's problematic. So how much we are willing to keep learning, which means knowing the truth. No? Because sometimes we may be too sure of what we think we are or we know, and it's healthy to leave some door open for the possibility of we may be mistaken, or we may not be mistaken, but what we have can be bigger also. What we understand can go deeper also. When we reach this type of absolute idea, this is everything, I know everything, and this, you are not giving any more space for progress. So you will feel immediately stagnated, like stuck. No? So those types of questions, I think, and of course, how how I am relating with other people, how nicely I'm communicating. Communication is such a crucial aspect of our life, how clear I am in my communication, how much I'm willing to hear the other people. Again, not like from doubting it extremely about my integrity or getting into paranoia, but a healthy inquiry. Like, how can I do it better today? A little bit today, and tomorrow a little bit more, and so on and so forth.
In this context, sometimes even when a person already starts to search for meaning and it's open to learn, gets to that extreme and it's caught up in that life trap of perfectionism. Like, we want to be perfect, we want to do everything in a perfect way, and even that we want to, I see the lesson, I want to learn, but that starts a bit neurotic to be, and on the other extreme, I'm too vulnerable, I'm too weak. And people think that if I escape from this perfectionism, I will be too vulnerable, too weak. So I cannot let myself in that. I need to push more.
Yeah, again, we have the two extremes that need to be reconciliated and properly integrated, because if you are looking for meaning, ultimate meaning, what to do, because there are levels of meaning. Now you can say, like, on some level of meaning, but what's the ultimate meaning of everything? And when you really get in touch with ultimate meaning, you realize this is infinite, this is eternal. I'm eternal, and the ultimate meaning is eternal. There's no end to this. How deep can I go here? So the idea here is that perfectionism is not a very good stance to take in front of the infinite, if you will. Because, I mean, that will get you neurotic, basically. And generally this necessity of perfection, at least in our tradition particularly, we will say that's more a demand of the ego than a necessity of the heart. The heart doesn't need perfection. The ego wants perfection, everything to be perfect. And of course, we live in a society that sometimes presents this idea, everything is perfect. In publicity, everything looks perfect. And we even subliminally and consciously, we feel this pushing, this pressure, I have to be perfect. Because everyone is perfect, and it seems you will only be successful if you are perfect. Or at least if you present yourself as perfect, and you have to put the Photoshop in your picture in Instagram, and you have to be perfect, because you are full of fear that if I'm not perfect, nobody will love me, nobody will accept me, I will remain alone. So you try to be perfect out of fear. But which perfection is that one? So real perfection comes out of faith, compassion, and love, and confidence. I mean, real love, and what I would call unconditional love. Generally, in this world, we are really fearful, and for us, that's a good way of putting that. We sometimes find so much difficulty in recognizing our mistakes, because we are so fearful that if I accept that I'm wrong, I'm imperfect, people will stop loving me. Because this narrative is there subliminally. Only if you are perfect, you will be loved and successful. So even subconsciously we'll say, we won't be able to accept any wrongs in us because I want to be loved. So the only way of breaking that type of mechanism, when you find unconditional love. Unconditional love means someone who sees you with all your imperfections and still loves you. Who is not telling you, well, call me when you are perfect and I will love you then. It doesn't work like that. Sometimes in this world the relationships do not work because of that. Because when we start a relationship, we kind of have an existential void in our heart, and we see the other person as having the same size of our void, and the other person is thinking the same. I have this hole here, and that person seems to really fit. But you idealize the other person according to your fears, and you project, oh, she's perfect, oh, he's perfect. And of course, after some time of knowing each other, realize we are not perfect. And it's so difficult to continue loving each other with imperfections included, but that's what love is about. Love is about, I love you no matter how imperfect you are. And ego is, first become perfect, then I love you, which is not very loving. So generally, in that connection, for us, perfection is not so important, because we can love without waiting for the other to be perfect. And when you yourself become perfect, there's also no limit to that, spiritually speaking, because it's connected with the eternality of the soul, with the infinite. There's no limit to perfection. So it's a way of saying perfection, but actually, like if you receive a PhD, and you could say that's the perfection of psychology, but on top of that, you can continue developing your career without limits, even though you reach the technical level of perfection in this world in that career, but you can continue growing without limits. So on one side, this idea of perfection, and regarding vulnerability for us, that's of course not necessarily a bad word, because to be vulnerable doesn't necessarily mean to be weak, or to be like to have low self-esteem, or to play the victim. It can happen in that sense, of course, and it's not healthy with this extreme of perfectionism. But I think a good key to avoid this extreme is to understand that actually there's a place for healthy vulnerability. But again, we go back to this moment of unconditional love. We are fearful of showing ourselves vulnerable, because sometimes in this work we have shown that side of us, and we have been exploited, because the other person didn't know what to do with our vulnerability also, because it's such a delicate moment and valuable thing you are showing, that if you are not trained and educated to know how to honor or respect others' vulnerability, you may end up destroying the other person, even without having the intention. So we may have shown our vulnerability and realized, oh no, every time I tried, it didn't work. My heart was destroyed. So I will go to the other extreme. I will be perfect. I put this barrier in front of me, and I will show myself perfect, even though I'm still vulnerable. So the point is, it's not problem in being vulnerable. Actually, it's a great potential in vulnerability. There is a lot of empowerment in it, but only when you express that vulnerability in the proper context. Again, when someone who has unconditional love, who's loving you despite your faults. So you show yourself in this vulnerable side, but you are receiving affection, you are receiving compassion, understanding. So vulnerable means I open myself extremely to be affected, but whatever is coming, be good or bad. So if that's good, I mean, that's super empowering, if you really show your vulnerable side. But we should know, again, where to express that side of us, knowing that unfortunately not every person is expert in dealing with their own vulnerability, and therefore with others' vulnerability. But if properly done, both this idea of perfection and vulnerability can be nicely integrated in the context of unconditional love, not conditional love, under conditions, under a contract. But that's importance again of good company, good friends, good guidances, elders that we can learn from, and we can receive this deep emotions and deep wise advice. So
the Sufi poet Rumi has a nice quote: "You need to break your heart until it opens." So it's kind of in that direction that you need to.
Yeah. And in Japan also they have this tradition called kintsugi, where if a porcelain jar breaks, generally something breaks, we will throw it immediately and buy a new one. But what they will do is like they will pour liquid gold in all the parts that it was broken, and will remake the jar, and they will highlight all the broken parts, like implying this broken stuff is actually part of the history of this item, and it's helping it to become even more, no? So in connection to the broken heart, if you will, and the pieces, and how to put the pieces all together. And we could say that the more the jar is broken, the more gold you feel, and at one point everything will be filled with gold after so many breakings. So in the same way, we need sometimes to go through these strong experiences in life, but we have to have confidence and trust. It's not that we will get lost and will be broken completely, but if we do experience them in the proper context, with proper guidance, proper light, even those most painful moments will end up like being this pure gold filling our hearts and making it like something more and more brilliant and valuable, basically.
And in this process of accepting our vulnerability, vulnerable side, what role does humility play in that?
Well, that's quite interconnected, because without humility you cannot acknowledge your vulnerability, basically. Humility, again, is not something undesirable. No, it's not something that I lend myself to be abused by others. Like I'm extremely naive and everyone is taking advantage of me. This has nothing to do with that. Humility, basically, I would say it's a synonym of sincerity, of recognizing who I am, my limitations, how dependent I am, as we spoke before. It's not that everything is in my control. And all the things that I realize, there are so many elements that I am depending on, and I'm so easily affected by so many things, which is not, again, necessarily bad, but that creates a moment for vulnerability when I realize I'm not omnipotent and super capable of everything. There's no need to create that type of forced idea on us, but to acknowledge our necessities, our frailties, even our doubts and fears, to embrace them, to accept them as part of vulnerability, but to embrace them, not to remain forever doubtful or fearful, but to acknowledge that's going on, and what can I do to upgrade myself. So, of course, again, humility has to do, once I found that nice definition of humility in the dictionary, I was curious what the dictionary is saying about humility. On the one hand, they said an interesting thing. Say humility means to have the capacity of acknowledging your own shortcomings or mistakes. So there are different ways of defining humility, but I like that one. That's quite tied with vulnerability, like, okay, I have the courage of recognizing my mistakes, and I won't over-identify with them. I won't just, I'm my mistakes. No, it's like a dust that is present there, and I have to clean the dust from the room, and I am the one to take the broom and clean the whole thing. But it's there, so I acknowledge that. And vulnerability means that moment where I feel small because I'm small, but I'm connected with something very big also. No? The example sometimes is given when you are in front of the ocean, you will feel small. I mean, if you feel big in front of the ocean, you have some emotion dysfunctionality, you need therapy probably, they should call you. But when you feel small in front of the ocean, it's not that you feel bad about yourself. You feel nice, you feel great, part of something bigger than yourself. But that's an important point of this idea of vulnerability. You may feel small in one sense, but you feel part of something that is bigger than yourself, and that something is totally loving and charming and beautiful. So it's not a problem. That's the point. It's not once you understand that, the more vulnerable you are in the proper environment, again, the more empowered you will become. Even though it may sound paradoxical, vulnerability and empowerment, properly understood, one will take to the other. The real empowerment is in recognizing your frailties and failures and being willing to change, and doing that in a proper environment. You will become so much filled with empowerment and knowledge and capacities than if you try just to remain, to convince yourself I'm perfect, I won't show any mistakes to anyone. That is weakening you more and more. Even though externally you may present another picture, we are not interested in the external picture, but reality goes beyond what we can see with our eyes.
In that sense, what are some, I know that this is not a cheap thing, but how in our everyday life we can feel this connection to the bigger thing, to the bigger context, and really feel that empowerment coming from that side?
Well, I would say that it's important to, as much as one can, but this is a very traditional practice in different schools, try to make yourself some time in your day where you stop everything you're doing and try to meditate and pray or enter in contact with some sacred chants. Different people will have different traditions, but try to enter in touch with the most sacred space inside of you. Try to stop all these like intense dynamics of daily life that are there, and we should attend them, but also it's good to know when to put pause, and for a minute try to focus on certain books of wisdom and hearing the message of elders and wise people, and spending at least some minutes per day, begin with something that is sustainable. It's ideally in the morning if you can, ideally before starting your whole day. And I'm sure that if you are able to do that sustainably on a certain basis, day after day, at least some minutes, you will still start to feel, oh, this is transforming my life, my day, and therefore my week, and therefore my month, my years, my life, my person. And gradually, of course, there are certain ways of adjusting some habits you may have in your daily life. Of course, this is a very broad way of replying. Each person is so unique, specific case. But as much as you understand, okay, I may be suffering because I'm doing these things, I have these habits, these patterns of thought, they are not healthy. So the more you change your habits, that will create what we call in yoga language samskaras, which means like impressions, different results, that in turn, different actions when done in different way, in a better way, create impressions that create new habits. And when you put all these new healthy habits together, they create a new sense of personality actually. And we realize, wow, I mean, I'm still the same, but at the same time, I'm not the same. I mean, I'm seeing myself in a new light, and therefore I'm seeing everyone else and everything else in a new light. But all that like radical, if you will, change of vision may start with some daily small great changes, if you will, in this pattern of thought, how I express myself, how I see others. And sometimes again, for getting the strength of doing those changes, some moments in the day of introspection, meditation, prayer, study, or contact with wise sage people, they may be like our daily food, no? An inspiration for then, okay, what I do with this in my daily life, how do I walk the talk, as they say in the United States, how do I put this into practice? And in time you will realize, oh, this is working, there's a transformation in me, it's possible. So you receive some taste, some inspiration to continue doing that, and of course there is no limit to that. I mean, you can grow much more than what you can imagine today. So the horizon is quite bright and brilliant. So, but we need to start doing that from wherever we are. No need to over-idealize and try to get to a very high thing tomorrow. But we have to be expert in establishing short-term goals, middle-term goals, long-term goals in a sustainable way, and try to keep them and grow in them. So some general idea again. Each case is so individual and so many nuances may be there, but I hope that helps.
Yes. Because we're reaching the end of our interview, what would be one thing that you would like to invite our viewers to remember or to meditate on?
Well, apart from all that we have spoken already, which I think is worthy of meditation, I'm trying myself to do that on a daily basis. I will try to invite all the audience following this episode here to really not lose sight of this idea of purpose and meaning of who you are, and trying to keep focused in a direction that really you feel is making your life worth living, in connection to eternity again, because eternity puts everything into context. Whatever is temporary, we will pay attention to that. No? We are not neglecting that, but we understand that's here today, gone tomorrow. So the main point is how with all those things may be there, may not be there. So how can I be satisfied with myself, knowing that those things may not be tomorrow? So how can I enter in touch with something beyond this temporariness and remain there on a daily basis? Get closer to that more and more. And in time we will see, as I mentioned, there's much more even to eternality. But we have to begin somewhere, no? So at least try to live that door open, this portal. There is something more than the temporariness of the daily agenda, if you will, and dynamics, and have a glimpse of that. Dedicate some time for that. It's really worth value, so valuable. So it's the best possible investment we can do for our own self in eternity.
Thank you, Maharaj. Thank you for this wonderful conversation, and I'm really fulfilled. And I hope also our audience would have nice things to think about and to meditate on. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much for invitation. My pleasure.